Hey everyone, welcome to the CyberHub Engage podcast. My name is James Azar and I'm your host. This podcast, if you're tuning in for the very first time, is all about cybersecurity in layman terms. We want to keep it simple. We want to give you the best tools and tips that you can get your hands on and some really prudent and important information in order for you to make the right decisions and defend yourself, your business, and your family from the existing cyber threats that are out there today. Thank you for tuning in. This is our third episode of the CyberHub Engage podcast. Today we're going to be talking with Mr. Kevin Peterson from Security Ascent. He's going to be talking about the marketing after a security breach, the communication within the organization and with its clients, customers, and more importantly, we're going to be talking about cybersecurity, which brings us to this week. And today is Friday, April the 13th. And I haven't had any weird things happen to me yet today. And if you haven't, that's great either too. I want to talk a little bit about the Facebook Cambridge situation that went on Wednesday and Thursday at our nation's capital. And so Mark Zuckerberg, the CEO and founder of Facebook, was summoned to Capitol Hill to talk about the Cambridge data breach, what it's being called, at least for now. And discuss why 85 million Americans' information was used by Cambridge Analytics in an election, in election data analytics and so forth. And really, this touches a very, important topic, which is, your privacy on social media. Does it exist? Do you have it? Can the company do anything with your media? And really, who gets to decide that? And a lot of us look at the federal government to do that. And after watching the testimony and the questions from the senators and congressmen, I'm very worried if the federal government tries to regulate anything Facebook related. The questions that were asked to Mark Zuckerberg were elementary school questions. Half of the senators and congressmen knew nothing of Facebook's operation or how Facebook even works. There were some moments that were very embarrassing to congressmen and senators. And you could tell that Mr. Zuckerberg was a bit frustrated with the fact that, they didn't really know what they were talking about, and yet he was having to be grilled about his company's operation. Now, I'm not defending Facebook here, right? There was a breach. There was a lack of, there was a misuse of protecting data, but that doesn't justify, I'm sorry, what I meant to say was not that it doesn't justify, but the fact is, if you're Congress and you're the Senate and you're summoning someone like Mr. Mark Zuckerberg to come talk to you, you should at least have your facts in order and have the right questions. Like, what's the demographics of the 85 million people who were breached by this? Where were they located? What were their ages? How are they being notified? And so forth. And while the last part of notification you'll hear, Kevin and I'm sure we'll talk about it during the podcast, but there's a lot more to that than just, is Facebook a monopoly? You can't call a company with a superior product a monopoly because you can't. A lot of companies try to compete with Facebook and have failed miserably. And the lack of knowledge by our elected officials just comes to point out the fresh blood that's needed in Washington to really address cybersecurity and cybersecurity threats. Because if you can't figure out how social network like Facebook works, how are you going to understand how to legislate and defend the American people from cybersecurity threats? That's my rant for today. We're going to be right back with Mr. Kevin Peterson from Security Ascent, and we're going to be talking about cybersecurity. Stay tuned for the CyberHub Engage podcast. I want to thank our sponsor, CyberHub Academy, for helping us make this podcast happen. Go to cyberhubacademy.com. Get more information about what they're doing. We'll be right back after this brief break. Thank you. And we're back. Welcome back to the Cyber Hub Engage podcast. I'm your host, James, and in with us right now is my good friend, Kevin. Kevin, say hello.
Hey, James. How's it going today?
It's good. Happy Friday. It's Friday the 13th. So we are recording. It is Friday the 13th. Freaky things happening to you today, Kevin?
No.
Nothing?
Pretty much normal.
Traffic's horrible today in Atlanta.
It wasn't bad for me, actually.
I just a 20-minute car dealership ride took me like an hour.
Yeah. No, that wasn't my experience.
School buses.
Well, yeah,
I blame school buses.
Yeah. Traffic multiplies by about 3 as soon as school goes back in
And
session.
then school buses stop on a 2-lane road and just stop.
I think they do that on purpose.
Yeah, I'm going to
They enjoy
vent
it.
about school buses and the need for our government to address those on top of cybersecurity, right? So they got to address cybersecurity, but we really got to talk about the school bus issue because this school bus issue is problematic for traffic flows for people on the go.
I actually think a lot of municipalities would take on the school bus before they would cybersecurity.
I think they know more about that.
Yeah,
that
me too.
impacts them more than cyber.
Right. Yeah, because they can relate to it. They remember their days on a school bus.
Yeah.
They'll
The
never remember
smelly
being
school
secure.
bus with the driver. And,
Right.
I mean, who still Micah, who's our technical director? Do you remember your days of a school bus? Do you remember the smell of the school bus? All right, he said I do. He doesn't have a mic yet. He's not that important yet, so we'll get him one soon enough, though. So, Kevin, welcome.
Hey,
Thanks
you.
for joining us. Our third episode of Cyber Hub Engage podcast. I'm very excited about Kevin. A great friend, awesome persona in cybersecurity marketing. So he's not one of those techie dudes that none of you guys who are listening to this are going to, understand or be like, oh, I don't know what he's talking about. He speaks to our eye level and he has a great background, veteran U.S. Air Force, right? So
Right.
You and Micah can high five that.
We just did.
And you guys just did do that. You know what? I'll let you just tell everyone a little bit about yourself and what you're doing nowadays, because today's a big day for you. It's not only Friday the 13th, but right before we started, you gave me some great news.
Oh, yeah. So, well, first of all, let me address the not being geeky and technical. I did get IPv6 working on my Juniper SRX3. No, kidding. I did, but that's
none of that matters.
none of that matters. Okay.
Our listeners, if they are experts, that's great.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
And we love them. And thanks for listening. But we really want to talk to the people who, what is it that they said? I saw a recent survey that said 98% of executives don't know cybersecurity.
Right.
Only 2% really understand it. So everyone's talking to that 2%. We want to talk to the 98%.
Right. I was just giving you a hard time. So the question was, or I was sharing with you some of the news I had earlier today. I had been working for this great company, Zscaler, out of the Bay Area. Really hot company, just had their IPO. Today was actually my last day with them. I had technically been part-time with them since January as I started up this new venture, and they knew that I was doing this, so it was all great. But they're launched, everything's going perfectly well for them. It was just the right time to make that exit. It's funny, I reported right to the chief strategy officer, and he called me on Tuesday and said, hey, look, it's, here's where we are, and would you like to go and exit now? I was like, heck yeah. And it wasn't, when you leave somewhere, a lot of people are like, oh, am I getting let go and all this other stuff. It's never like that. It's a realization that it was just the end of the chapter, right? For me personally.
But you're starting a new chapter, which is a better one.
Right, a much better chapter for me, which is starting my own company and my own brand. And that new company is really focused on the cybersecurity marketing piece, which is effectively really 3 pillars to it. Don't want to do the big sales pitch just yet, but really 3 pillars to it. One is really addressing the needs specifically of the chief marketing officers as it relates to cybersecurity.
Right.
Pillar 1. Pillar 2 is the other side of that, which is the chief security officers addressing the marketing piece, because there is this big gap between cybersecurity and marketing. Everybody can see it. And we can talk about my background and how I came to this realization. But then on top of that, there's the full-on crisis management piece, which is a hot topic, and it needs to be. And that is where you've got your crisis comms, your PR firms. And, and this is okay. They might not even know how to spell HIPAA. They can maybe barely spell PCI, or they need explanations. during the form of a crisis, they need somebody to really act as that hardcore intermediary between those roles, between the cybersecurity role, between the cybersecurity professionals, the CISOs,
Right.
and the CMOs to help feed the information and make sure that everything's on point. And that's where we come in.
Well, most CMOs that I've met, and I was at a big digital marketing conference in San Diego earlier this year, and I was talking to a lot of different CMOs, and one of the things we were talking about was obviously GDPR, which is a very, very big deal for a lot of companies.
Yep, read all 150 pages.
Yeah, I think you were telling me that last week, right?
Right.
Like, you're like, have you read it? I'm like, no, no. I neither have the time, nor do I want to read what Europeans write into their laws. I haven't lived in Europe for so many years, and just dealing with Europeans, I just realized that any law I read will probably change in a year.
Right. Yeah, I did live in Europe for 4 years. I'm married to a European lady, so for me it was and I really have
Feel
to.
like it's your obligation.
Well,
to read
no,
it.
yeah, I really kind of have to know, right? I mean, if I'm going
Yeah.
to help translate the right messaging in the case of a breach or just due diligence or building up the brand of an organization, you kind of need to know what they're facing.
Right. And so with GDPR, many CMOs worried about GDPR, but really don't even can wrap their heads around this thing called cybersecurity. And they look at it, and really the big brands consider it crisis management. But when you talk of the small, and what I mean by small, like 20 million annual to about 500 million annual revenue, who do employ a full-time CMO, or a director of marketing or a vice president of marketing, they don't see the crisis management or incident piece as a significant piece in cybersecurity. And it's not because of that. It's because they don't comprehend cyber. So what do you do in those cases? What can you tell a CMO who's listening to the podcast today that in a sentence or a paragraph maybe that can go, okay, now I get it?
Yeah.
Do you have that secret sauce?
Yes. First of all, I kind of want to push back on the notion that they're not concerned about it. I think they are. They know that they don't know what the future holds in some of these cases. So my guidance to any CMO is, leverage the voice of the CISO, actually build those bridges and build them as early as possible. Have the dialogue and just be honest. Just look, I don't know anything about cyber. You're going to have to bring that to speed, and you'll be amazed at where that goes. So one of the, and I'll illustrate this, one of the one of the top CISOs that I personally know in the country, and he's been on a lot of boards out in the Bay Area. As soon as I spun up the company and he caught wind of it, he contacted me. He goes, "You're absolutely in a great space. This is topical. This is where things are going." Speaking personally as somebody who's spent countless hours with CMOs trying to work out messaging and just doing prep work, he goes, it's a language that not everybody speaks. So there needs to be a translator for that.
Your website, and can you tell our listeners the name of your company?
Sure. It's Security Ascent. So security, ASCENT, like you're going
Right.
up, but the security starts with a Z.
Awesome.
Yeah, and it's a couple of reasons for that. One is, if you look at the visuals on my website, you'll notice everything is slanting up and to the right.
Right.
Right, because that's where Gartner and that's where everybody is. If you look at any financial data, you want to keep moving up and to the right. And that's really the visual that we try to portray, is that let's get your brand and your cybersecurity always moving in that direction. And the letter Z actually does that. If you look, it actually slants up and to the right, which is kind of cool. New logo pending. I haven't come out with it yet, but I have something new on the website. So that's certainly important. And the other one is just when you go to search in your inbox and you search for security, everything comes up. Right. So at least now, when you put the Z in the front, it becomes somehow more memorable. People I found, which is good. But you can type either, and you're still going to get to the webpage.
That's your marketing head in action.
Yes, right.
The thought behind the name, the logo. But I saw on your website you had a kind of a playbook for CMOs on there, right?
I too.
Like a breach response, kind of like an incident response, just some steps they can take. Share some of those with us.
Yes, absolutely. So I've got two actually things on the website, and I'm actually working to ungate them, if you will, so they'll be easier to download and see. Some of it's partially there right now anyway. but provide some information. You get a copy emailed to you. One of them is an actual cybersecurity for marketing playbook. Plain and simple. Everybody's got a playbook. This is really driven from, so part of my background is I was a business unit security officer for a big Fortune 5 company. You can find me on LinkedIn. I don't need to name everybody here today, but big Fortune 5 company.
Especially if they're not sponsors.
That's right. That's right. So I had 75 software products underneath me, several $100 million managed services business, not the P&L, thank goodness, just the cybersecurity, the risk, the compliance standpoint. And then on top of that, really across all divisions of the company, really helping lead the story and the charge behind moving to the cloud. So from A to Z, from Azure to Zscaler, effectively moving to those different platforms. So that was kind of my blitz, if you will, into the cybersecurity landscape. And give me that question again. Where were we going with this?
A few tips that you can give our CMOs on the playbook.
So the playbook. Yeah, that's
the playbook. I mean, I loved your playbook. The first time I met you, we had a beer in Avalon, which is a nice little center right in North Alpharetta. Which, if you ever visit Atlanta and you don't go to Avalon, you really do miss out on a really fun experience.
Yeah, it's almost like a vacation destination for a lot of people.
They
said to me.
They had a band there yesterday. I was driving by and they had the street closed down and they had a band in the middle of the day. I'm like, my office is in the wrong place.
Right.
But when I met you, you talked about your playbook.
Right.
And it's one of those that after our meeting, I came back and I was like, oh, this is so cool.
Yep.
Went and looked at it and I go, man, he's spot on. And so I figured some of our listeners are listening. They're probably driving, so they can't really download it yet. But let's give them some tips so that.
Okay, great. Yeah. So the what we cover in the playbook, and the playbook is very visual. It's designed to draw people in, but the playbook structure is built that it's something that you would have a printed copy at your home office and at your business office, day in and day out. If there is a breach, you want every top executive, everybody from the CMO, the CIO, the CISO, you name it, chief legal officers, everybody who might have to play, have worked out what all their roles are all the way through. And not only their own kind of to-do list, but they can see where everybody else is executing on. And it's very clear. At this point, you should be doing this. And that way there's not a lot of noise in the background. People understand where their responsibilities lie when they have to do stuff. And there are specific SLAs, if you will, and objectives for people turning things around. So for example, and this would be one of the use cases, say for example that there's been a breach and there's some external communication needs to go on for the next 2 weeks, 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 6 months. What's the SLA for creating the right content and getting it distributed, getting it approved, right? Because if you go to create something or, there's some artifact that needs to be shared and it's going to take forever, that's not going to serve any purpose because it's just going to go to the trash bin ultimately because it's going to time out, right? It's not evergreen content. It was valid only for a certain period of time. So there's one of the tips. The other one, and something that we've been working with quite a bit, is actually leveraging some marketing tools that security people don't know about. And these are tools like Meltwater, Brand24, Brandwatch, all different price points. Some of them get pretty expensive, right? If you go to Meltwater, I think the minimum they'll hit you up with is probably $8,000 a year for a subscription. If you go to Brandwatch, you're probably talking $12,000 a year, entry level cost, right? And it's only going to go up. But if you have somebody specifically focusing on the cybersecurity brand of the organization with the look back capability, right? Being able to go back and look across tens or 100 million different resources, not just Twitter, not just Facebook, not just LinkedIn, but all these blog posts, all this other all these news articles, and look back. Now you can start to tell your own story, and that's ultimately what it's all about. At the end of the day, you can let the internet tell your story. You know how that's going to work, or you can get busy working on it yourself.
Telling it yourself.
Right.
And I think for CMOs who are listening who don't really understand the cybersecurity world, very few cyber people are on the major platforms that you just mentioned, which is the Facebook, the LinkedIn, and the Twitter. You see them more on different blogs and forums that are more CISO related, more cyber related, or you see them in specific groups within those platforms, but they're not really active participants, I like to say, in the CNN news story or the Fox or the Bloomberg or whoever else is on there. And so that's awesome. I wanted to ask you this. So you and I, the first time we met, we chatted up about so many different things, my Lord. It was a lot of fun, and the beer was good.
Yes, it was.
But what are some of the common mistakes you see brands make in an incident? When a breach happens or an incident occurs, right? And there's a difference between an incident and a breach.
Of course. So the number one mistake, especially in the case of a breach, is where everything comes in and it's 100% locked down, right? You get everything is under attorney-client privilege at this point, right? That's no fun. I mean, every single email, you have to tag it and track it. There's a need for it sometimes, but handcuffing all of your people so that they, it's like no email, no Twitter, don't say anything about anything. It creates a crisis for that individual. If you have people on your team and they are social people anyway, especially as the younger crowds, the digital natives progress into the workforce, those are handcuffs they don't need. I can, and it's something I show in one of the ebooks that I came out with. It's also on the website. I have a nice screenshot there showing somebody's profile on LinkedIn. This is an organization who had been breached. This is one individual at the organization, and I blurred out their name. I'm not going to out them, but they're all of their, underneath their name in LinkedIn, you have all of their, here's who I work for and everything else. All that's there now, although every other job is listed, even though they're still there, their job is listed as undisclosed. They're not even wanting to share the brand of your company.
Is that a company that starts with an E and ends with an X? You can blink twice.
I'll just stay loose on that one. But I usually don't like to throw those names out there. But the fact is, at the individual level, their own brand is in crisis right now. So if that's what you want, more power to you, right? You're on the right track if you're locking everything down. But locking everything down means that neither the CMO nor the CISO is in control anymore. And really, it's just lawyers being lawyers. And I get it. I get it with attorneys that they are risk averse,
right?
By their upbringing.
It's their nature.
It's their nature, as are security people. And that's why that marketing person having a much stronger role in saying, we can work with this and we can work with our PR firms that we have under retainer and everything else. We can bring everybody together and we can build a better story than silence and crickets. Because I'm telling you, the internet will be brutal to you. Let me give you one fantastic example.
Love it. Is it going to be about Mark Zuckerberg and the congressman of the last few days?
No, probably could have come up with. I really haven't been processing that too much this week. I have too much other stuff going on, but I did read some headlines. But this one was related to one of the most current breaches. So this one was the Panera Bread one, right?
Right.
So in the Panera Bread breach, Brian Krebs got a hold of it, and he was pretty cutting in his. And you can just go read up on his assessment.
We'll post that on the CyberHub Engage group for those listeners.
Perfect.
They can see it.
Yeah. So he did this. Well, all you have to do is go Google Brian Krebs shocker, right? If you Google Brian Krebs shocker, one tweet's going to come up. And he's going to say, this individual, who he took great pains to out in his article, who is a director of security or whatever at Panera, this one individual, when you go and dig into his LinkedIn profile, they said he was a security officer at Equifax. Shocker. right? But look at this. If you go back and look at the dates, so here's what's very unfortunate. I think this is a real wake-up call for everybody in cybersecurity. His run, his 4 years or whatever at the time was, at Equifax was actually over 4 years ago. He has probably been making a very strong claim all this time that, well, that was predating me. You can't really put that stink on me because I had been gone for 3-4 years by that
And
point.
forensics say that they weren't in there that
Right.
long ago. They were in there. They were in the systems for about 12 to 14 months before.
Yeah. So he can make a very strong case that, hey, look, that wasn't me, right? Everybody believe him. But as soon as you're now at another organization and then something happens there and you are implicated
Associated.
heavily,
Yeah.
the two are anded together. Now you can't separate them, right? In anybody's mind, your brand is, how do you even find a job in this industry after that case? I think that's a real wake-up call for everybody in cybersecurity. You're sitting there going along thinking everything's great.
Right.
And then you go to another job, you've got a better job at another place. Maybe you become a CISO or a CMO or whatever, head of director of whatever, right? And then something happens to both places you worked at, and it just looks terrible on your LinkedIn profile, right? And people do, they and them together. And
well, I think the security industry, though, is very forgiving.
they are.
Meaning that within the security industry themselves, the CISOs, the directors of securities, we all understand that, putting it all on one person's shoulder is, blaming, someone for something that they had no control really over. They had oversight, but they didn't really manage the day to day.
Right.
So
I think that's coming from our conversation earlier that we had, where because I really said the same thing. I think at large the cybersecurity community is very empathetic. So it kind of shocked me. I was sitting on a flight when the night that Equifax, I don't know why we keep going back to them, but maybe because we both live in Atlanta and they're close. But I remember seeing it on the news. I'm on a flight, reading through it, and I actually liked what I saw out of the gate. I truthfully did. And I put it on LinkedIn. I said, out of the gate response, they had some good solid moves. They had a dedicated website with an empathetic message from the CEO. Yeah, it was teleprompter and everything else, but they had a message. And it was, now let's see how it plays out, right? So looking at that, what happened shortly after kind of shocked me. I saw from another CISO I know in the industry put on Twitter that, Equifax, and this is pretty much a quote, Equifax is actually, or literally writing the book on how not to respond to a security breach right now. I was like, really? Kind of early to be judging that, because ultimately, if you can continue to build your own narrative, tell your own story, leverage your influencers that are out there in the right positive ways, right? There's a right way and a wrong way to do that. But as long as you follow the right formulas and actually build your own content and build that message, I firmly believe you can recover. So I would say to a CISO, you know what? If you want to address that one tweet, call your title of your presentation that. How not to respond to a security breach by company breached.
It's funny you say that. You transition me to I think, who's the one company that you've seen that has responded to an incident or a breach the right way? Like, if I'm a CMO and I want to go, listen, I've read your playbook, great, but who's really executed some stages of it successfully? Can you name a few that you can think of off the top of your head?
Yes and no. So in a good way, the ones who have executed really well, you haven't really heard about so much.
Right, but I want to. The reason I'm going to say that is because we're not trying to badmouth Equifax by no means. I mean, they dealt with an impossible situation in an impossible way, and I think that's the gap between a CISO to a CMO to a PR response to a government response. I think, just to answer my own question, I think Facebook did a pretty decent job at it, Mike. They had a 24-hour, kind of mode of silence where no one said anything. And then Mark Zuckerberg came out with a video. He didn't come out with a scripted statement. He came out with a video, which I thought was very, even if they had a teleprompter there that he was reading off of, was still better than a statement on a website. Because at least you see the person's reaction, his body language, his eye contact. There's things about video that make video better in those kind of situations, I think, than a written statement that you don't even know if that person actually did.
Right. And you just answered your own question. The companies who have put a human face on things and not address everything as company spokesperson Mike or whoever says, right? Everything goes back to the company spokesperson, or just read our press release. The companies who avoid that and actually put a real face to what's going on, they're the ones who tend to recover faster. There's the sad fact is, and this is something that is a message, should be a real call to action for all of the cybersecurity people out there, the CISOs and the CIOs, is that the stock price really doesn't recover within 90 days. So I wrote a blog post, it's on my website about this, where I've heard this several times from security leaders out there. Well, we'll just keep quiet because 90 days from now, we're going to see,
people will forget. Short-term memories.
Right, short-term memories. The sentiment, and that's a huge measuring stick, the sentiment recovers and the stock price returns. And a lot of people are very short-sighted in that. And they think, well, if I can only manage in the short term. But, that's why I wrote this blog post. I went out and found a bunch of data from Deloitte and Ponymon and all these other ones. If you look at it, the stock difference between them and their competitors over the course of the next couple of years is severely depressed, right? Severely, because it's the cost of capital. It's the
Who's
brand.
the biggest example of that in your blog?
I didn't name any names in particular, but the data actually is out there. I did provide, I just can't remember the companies, but the links are in there.
Did you source the data?
I did, of course I sourced the data.
Yeah. I'm really curious to see that because I'm curious because, I said Facebook, but, I want you to answer the question. Who do you think did a good job outside of Facebook? Because you can't use my answer.
Yeah.
I wanted to beat you to the punch.
Yeah. I want to say it was it Citibank? I'm pretty sure it was Citibank. I have another name bouncing in my head right now, but I'm going to go with Citibank on this.
Okay.
They had a breach, so apologies if I'm wrong, but we'll correct it in the notes if I am. I assure you.
We'll check it.
We'll check it. But they had one a couple years ago, and they basically said, "Look, organizations get breached. I can't remember the exact wording, but we're on top of this. Some confidence was inspired, and they pretty much recovered rather quickly from that. So that's not the answer for everybody, though, right? Everybody can't go out there and make those exact statements and get away with it because it becomes repetitive. People start seeing through it. So you still have to
the Citi breach was over like 360,000 cards.
Yeah, that was it.
That were exposed. And yeah, you're right. Because I'm looking, I Googled the Citi breach right now. And there's a website on here that really has the SEO on it. And I'm not going to mention them by name. But if you go to the bigger news organizations that are on the first page, really not much of it. And that was in 2011. That breach was
that long ago.
I think the one a few years ago was Chase. Oh, Citibank's had a bunch of breaches here apparently.
Maybe it was Chase. Actually,
Chase was the one in 2014 where the hackers actually manipulated. It was the largest Chase. It was the largest data breach. It was the largest data breach before Equifax.
Yeah,
because it was about 88 million Chase customers, and then that same group of hackers also hacked E-Trade, Scott's Trade, and all the different. But that was a brilliant breach. That breach wasn't about what they did with the data. Was just absolutely fascinating. And that's something we'll talk about in a later episode. I'm not going to give it all away here with Kevin. I'll have Kevin on one more time and we'll talk about that breach. and that's the Chase breach to me is one of those breaches where you're absolutely right. It was, Chase has only grown since that breach. Their cybersecurity unit is probably one of the best in the country. I think now they have like 2,500 employees that are in their IT cyber unit, not IT, not guys who network stuff, but live security and different, SOCs and all kinds of stuff. They did a really good job about that. So let's talk a little bit, and I kind of want us to pivot here for a second. Being that we're both in Atlanta, the Georgia cyber ecosystem continues to kind of grow and thrive, and you've kind of been in Silicon Valley and you were in Europe for a while. How do you see Atlanta rate compared to the scenes that you see, the security scene that you see out? Next week I'll be at RSA, right? You told me you're not going for first time in 12 years.
That's right.
So you're staying home. Good for you.
Right.
Avoiding a 5.5 hour flight and the traffic of San Francisco.
Yeah.
And how do you see the Georgia cyber scene now compared to the one in the Bay Area or in London in Europe or other places?
Yeah, it's coming on immensely strong. There was and I'm sure you've seen the article. There was an article that came out, major publication, maybe it was Forbes, maybe it was Wall Street Journal. I can't exactly remember. 7-8 months ago, and they were talking about which cities around the world or which areas around the world were vying for the title of the cybersecurity city.
Let's say the cyber hub.
The cyber hub. Let's go with that. Yeah, that was totally not planned. It worked though. So
cheap marketing
It really was. That was fun. Atlanta, well, Georgia at large was, right? From between Augusta was mentioned. There a lot of the work going out there with Cyber Command and Atlanta at large, which was great. Israel, no shocker there. That would be on there from the security culture that permeates in all the products. Silicon Valley was on there, and one more. I guess it was like maybe New York, New Jersey area, but people were shocked. It's like Atlanta. It's like yes, emphatically, absolutely, Atlanta. Made total sense to me. If you look at, of course, Georgia Tech has a lot of tech companies and the incubator startups and what have you. A lot of government research coming out of there. Then you've got the all across the state of Georgia, not just the metro Atlanta area. Down in Columbus, I was speaking last week there at an ISAC event, and there you have Aflac and TSYS and all these great companies out there dealing with tons of transactions and data and really nice cybersecurity training facilities. And then, of course, out in Augusta, they're building all the Cyber Command stuff out there. And at the state level, there are all these programs. So the education, the culture is becoming very strong, and the talent. I mean, I see peers and talent absolutely everywhere I go throughout the Atlanta market, and there are a lot of content creators, if you will,
right, out
there within the Atlanta market. We've got just people, a lot of authors. You've got Pete Cronus down at Turner, and the list goes on and on and on. Podcasters and and everything else. So the culture is definitely tilting very heavily in that favor. Are we going to overtake Silicon Valley as a security product company? Heck no, right? They'll produce the software and the hardware and the cloud solutions and everything else.
Well, the money's there.
The money's there.
Let's not lie. I mean, the funding here in Atlanta goes through about 3 sources, and if you can't get it,
right,
you're pretty much shunned out.
Right. Yeah. It's not the big. We don't have a.
You don't have the VCs that you have.
Yeah,
in
we don't
Silicon
have
Valley.
a Sand Hill Road type of thing going here in Atlanta. So, but that's not the brand, if you will, of the Atlanta cybersecurity market. The Atlanta cybersecurity market is really heavy on the practitioners. A lot of the government stuff is coming in here now, and just the momentum of the rapid growth in Atlanta, bringing all these big new logos, if you will, Mercedes-Benz and Porsche and all these NCRs and all these other companies that have come down here over the last years. Delta, right?
So Delta was a victim of a third-party breach. Speaking of Delta, about 2 weeks ago,
right?
The 24/7 AI, the chat bots, which is the future of marketing for all the marketers out there. It saves a ton of money. It's supposed to be more efficient, give the customer a quicker experience. Most people prefer to chat than talk on the phone and send emails because emails take forever to answer. How do you feel that's going to impact the Delta brand, if any?
They actually handled that pretty well. I think they stayed on point, doing their best to communicate that it was a third party. At the same time, it's still under your umbrella, if you will, right? Or under your wing, right? So in this particular case, that's just hardcore vendor assurance.
Right.
Anytime you go out and do a partnership with somebody else,
and you're giving them data.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the Cambridge.
Yes.
I mean, this is the Delta thing is almost eerily similar to the Facebook. They call it the Facebook data breach. I call it the I mean, everyone calls it a data breach and they try to define it as a data breach. And I feel like they're associating it with a data breach because it's Facebook and people can relate to that and maybe there'll be more outrage. And I think you haven't followed it, but I'll just give you the 411. We have elected officials who have no clue what Facebook does. And apparently neither do their staffers.
Yeah, I saw some of the highlights, just some of the headlines there. It's talking about how they were just asking a lot of the wrong questions to begin with.
It seems like it was just a slew of questions where Mark Zuckerberg had to go, sir, that's not what we do. But no, it felt like it became a conspiracy theory investigation into, someone went on a weird website at the Capitol and was like, hey, everyone, look, and shared it among all the staffers. And then they all came up with questions based on Mark Zuckerberg conspiracy theory that Facebook has files on everyone.
Let me just Google hashtag fake news Facebook Facebook and see, oh yeah, let me roll with this, right?
Yeah, they found a website put up by some guy in South Dakota who's living in the woods just going like, hey, Facebook has a file on every American and every person in the world. They control elections.
Well, let me ask you. So earlier, around Wednesday, they said they were going to start rolling out the notifications in your Facebook feed that if you were part of the 85 million out of 2.2 billion, so it wasn't everybody. Of course, 2.2 billion worldwide, but so 85 million is a lot. I'm not dismissing that. Did you get a notification?
I have not.
I have not either.
I have not, but I'm not interesting. I don't share my political opinions on Facebook.
Yeah.
Ratherly mild. I move around a lot. I travel a ton. I mean, I was in Texas yesterday and the day before that, and next week I'm in San Francisco, and then I'm back in Texas, and I'm abroad. So I think for a Facebook user and someone who does targeted ads in Facebook, I'm not the person they look for, and I think neither are you because you do travel as well.
Right. Yeah, and I have not received any notifications, which is great. I'm not following the wrong sources and doing the wrong things. But like you, and you tipped it a little bit there, I'm a marketer too.
Right.
I have to run ads. I have to help others run ads where they're appropriate. I can't get off Facebook. Part of my job.
Well, even if you get on Facebook, you're not. A lot of times when people run ads on Facebook, that you're targeting a specific interest, a keyword, a specific kind of demographic of people, and when you're in marketing, and I'm not saying I'm in marketing, but I'm in the business of creating content.
Right.
And I do promote, CyberHub Engage through social media because that's the great way to reach our listeners. And we do engage with them that way on Facebook or LinkedIn, CyberHub Engage. Cheap plug. Thanks for that pitch there, Kevin. That was good. I can get on base with that. Yeah, it's one of those where you see it often, and so you don't really share political opinions, and so you don't fall under that 85 million. I think a lot of that 85 million too is kids who can't vote. I think it's they haven't released the age of the 85 million users.
You're hitting on it, man. Wouldn't that be a fun chart to see? Now pivot this.
Now pivot this to 13 to 17 years old who come out and.
Seriously. Now that would have been one heck of a question for one of the people on the Hill to have asked Zuckerberg, right?
Right.
It's like, okay, 85 million. Pivot this for us.
Right.
Oh, you don't have it with you now? All right, when can we have that? Right?
Right. How many of those were kids?
Right.
Did you receive parents' permission to obtain information on a child? Because technically you need to have a parent. I mean, a kid can't even go to, get a driver's license.
They all lie about that. They all say they're 21 when they sign up or whatever.
Well,
they're 12.
Well, they say you got to have a parent's permission to do it. They don't. I mean, but again, it's just check marking, and a 13-year-old can check. I hate to give this comparison, but it's like pornographic websites. They say, yes, I'm 18. Well, if you're 17, you're not going to go, oh, you're going to click I'm 18. Of course you are. It's just what you do. And so it's, yeah, you're right. It's useless. But still, people put their date of birth and year of birth, even though if they do lie about it and have their parents' permission or not, people still do that. But I'd be interesting out of the 85 million to see how many of those were actual non-voting, people who just express political opinion, fell into this funnel that Cambridge Analytics was looking for, and it actually did that.
Yeah. I'm sure somebody's going to ask for it because they're going to listen to this podcast. And
Well,
then they're going to
if someone from the Hill does listen to this podcast, first of all, thank you. We appreciate it. Number 2, call us. Email us. We want to help you get the right questions out there. Because if I was sitting in that senator or congressman's chair, I had some very valid questions that I didn't feel were asked. And I was listening to it as I was working over the last few days. And I had it kind of running in my AirPods as the days went along. But I found it to be one of those where no one's asking the right questions. No one's nailing this on the head. And I don't know if it's the lack of education or if, I hate to say this because, we don't live in Russia, but was this just a sham hearing to please the public? It's one of those where, hey, we're doing something about something that we don't know. We know we can't do anything about. The whole Lindsey Graham monopoly thing was a stupid line of questioning because you can ask that. Why aren't you asking that to the AT&T executive who, or the Comcast executive or the Verizon executives in places where you don't have a choice? Or how about utility companies? Because, if I'm mad at the power company, guess what? I can either decide to have no power at all or a little bit of, or just pay them what they ask for. And so that's another one of those where you go, monopolies, let's not examine. The fact is there's a lot of competition to Facebook. Like it or not, it's just not as popular because it doesn't have the name brand recognition. It doesn't have the amount of users. I mean, there were social media platforms that came out, I remember a few years ago, that were paying you part of their ad revenue just so that you would go there. And people just didn't go there. People are on Facebook. Right. That's not a monopoly. That's a better product. That's a Mercedes or a Porsche over a Kia. No offense. Kias are built here in Georgia, and we do appreciate the fact that Kia employs Georgians. But again...
Yeah, well, I did hear, Mark at least allude to the fact that, what did he say? There will always be a free version of Facebook, thus implying there will be a paid version at some
of
point.
Facebook, right?
So people will be able to opt out of some of that data collection. And then he also made the comments about he believes that there will be regulation around this. And it's like, gee, you think? Certainly out of Europe, they'll be regulating that stuff.
GDPR is already doing that.
That's right.
GDPR.
So they'll be pulling their swords out of their sheaths on pretty soon, right? Come May.
Well, I think Facebook, Google, Twitter, LinkedIn are all going to get hit very hard in Europe come June 1st.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's just going to be the case. It's not that they're not GDPR ready. It's just that they've violated so many times prior to its even being implemented that it's not like they're going to turn on a switch on May 26th and go, hey, we're GDPR compliant now. And you see that now. I don't know if you get mailers from European companies at all, but I'm getting now to double opt-in mails. Please opt back in. We're doing our spring cleaning is one that I got today, which was brilliant. I'd want to name the company, but I can't. I got an email and the title said spring cleaning. We need your help. And so I opened it up and it was a double opt-in to continue to receive their newsletters as part of GDPR, explaining that, hey, if you don't do this, we can't email you anymore. And if you really do enjoy our content, we'd appreciate a double opt-in.
I like it, actually.
It's brilliant.
Yeah.
I thought it was really smart. Everyone opens a spring cleaning email, I think. Or maybe I'm just a psychopath who does that. I don't know. One of the weird ones who actually enjoys spring cleaning. But it is what it is. Oh, man. We can keep going on forever. There's just one last thing.
Sure.
When was the last time you went gliding?
Oh, gliding. Yeah. So I'm a pilot in my spare time. I also fly powered planes, but gliding is really the fun thing. Anybody can fly with an engine. Who wants to fly without one? So, me, I love flying without an engine. Last time I was up was about 3 weeks ago. Weather the last 2 weekends kept me grounded, but kind of need to have some sunshine and what have you out there to really enjoy the day. But yeah, had a great time. Had, I guess, 3 flights that day. The first 2 were, just quick toes, actually just getting comfortable again. Haven't flown all through the winter. And then, took it up. And finally the guys they had cleaned up everything on the ground, all the ground crew basically. And they're like, you coming in? I was like, yeah, come on in. So I just,
we're waiting. We can't go until you land.
yeah, I think I was at like 6,500 feet, just having a good old time. But yeah, if you ever get a chance to go gliding, it will go. But it's a great feeling. Just get a tow up to a couple thousand feet, release, and then one day last year I spent a nice, comfortable 3.2 hours without coming back down, just riding the thermals just outside of the city of Atlanta airspace, the Atlanta airport airspace, and that was fun. I couldn't walk when I landed; my rear end was so sore, but it was great.
Is it like sitting in the last seat of an airplane for 4 hours?
No, it's you're nicely reclined. It's quite a comfortable seat. It's just you're pulling a lot of G's when you're spinning around in circles at 45-degree angles in the sky and sharp turns. So that
wears you down.
It does. It wears you down. You drink a lot of water and continue to hydrate. But it's part of being up there, and getting your mind out of work and just listening to the wind around you, and making the most of the day. Just challenging yourself to do something that is actually quite extraordinary when you think about it.
I think aviation's fascinating, and so I had to ask you that question. And I want to thank you for coming to join us today. Kevin from Security Ascent here with us at the CyberHub Engage podcast. This has been a lot of fun. Thanks so much. And you can check him out. We'll have a link to his website and some of the stuff we spoke about today, and down below here as you're listening to the podcast. And if you have any questions, they can tweet at you. You do have Twitter. I know I follow you on Twitter. What's
at Security Ascent, ZECURITY Ascent, or me personally at Secure Access. I had that one a long time.
Wow. You have at Secure Access on Twitter?
Right.
Have you verified that?
Not yet.
You should do that probably, because something tells me sooner or later someone's going to want to get their hands on it.
I know people have tried to get their hands on it in the past, but yeah, it's a good one to have. Certainly a lot of the security product marketing people
want that.
It.
Yeah. So that's Kevin. This is the CyberHub Engage podcast. You can follow us on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter at CyberHub Engage. We'll be right back after this brief message. Hey everyone, James Azar here, and you're listening to the CyberHub Engage podcast. We're back. I want to thank Kevin for joining me today. That was a lot of fun, a very interesting conversation. I've said it the previous 2 episodes, but I get these experts in here. We start talking, and the conversation kind of takes a roll, and it can go on forever. But some really quick recap of Kevin and mine's conversation, and that's the fact that the conversation within an organization, if you work within an organization, if you're a CEO, a CMO, a CISO, there has to be a conversation, at least on a monthly basis, between a CISO and a CMO. And that conversation has to be built on what is the company doing, what's our playbook when a breach occurs. And I say this all the time, and I'll keep saying it. It's not if, it's when. And you need to be prepared for that rainy day. And insurance isn't the only thing that's going to cut it. And you can hear more about that on our first episode if you listen to my interview with Mr. Ralph Pasquarelli from Snelling & Walters. You'll hear more about, what really cyber liability is all about and what insurance really does cover and what it doesn't cover, and a lot of the pitfalls that happen along the way. It needs to be a company and an organizational thing. And as consumers, we also need to have a longer memory. And if there's one big thing that I took away as a consumer is long memory. And you can tune into our LinkedIn and Facebook groups at CyberHub Engage. Follow us on Twitter. Tweet at us if you have questions, anything you want to have answered. Just shoot us a note. Hashtag it CyberHub Engage. We'll be sure to answer them on every single episode. So to clarify, this is our 3rd installment. We've obviously pre-recorded these, but you can ask us questions about the first 3 episodes, and I will gladly answer them in the upcoming episodes. I'm going to be heading to RSA in San Francisco next week. I'll be interviewing some people out there. So we'll have some great content coming to you over the next few weeks with some great interviews with some great people. I promise you that. I want to thank you for listening to the CyberHub Engage podcast. I welcome your commentary, opinions, suggestions. We want to make this about you and not about us. So I want to thank Micah Smith, who is our technical director for the podcast. Micah, you can tell everyone hello. Hello. And I want to thank our guest, Kevin. I want to thank you, most importantly, our listeners. And I want to thank CyberHub Academy, who is our lone sponsor at this time, cyberhubacademy.com. They're a cybersecurity, resiliency, readiness, and awareness academy headed by Ms. Corinne Salzberg, who will be joining me to the next podcast next week. And we're going to be talking about her background in the Israeli military, her vision for CyberHub Academy and CyberHub Summit, and the things that they're doing, and how she fired me 8 years ago after meeting me, and then all this happened. So stay tuned for next week's episode. I want to thank you, CyberHub Engage. Again, LinkedIn, Facebook, share, everything, all that good stuff. Thank you so much. Talk to you soon.